The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250. Access Fort Wayne is a department of the Allen County Public Library.
So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Avon Waters. Avon?
Go ahead. Well, thank you very much for joining in, and I appreciate the few minutes to spend with you. First of all, I want to say that I don't feel qualified to teach you pastels. There's a lot. I just started doing pastels, and I know the email went out and said that I was going to do a demo and teach you basically how to do a pastel. The thing that I am qualified for, I think, is to share my experience, because I painted with oils for 40-some years, and I switched to pastel about 6 years ago. So I want to share with you that experience because it's still fresh in my mind. If you ask me what it was like to get started in oils, it was so long ago I couldn't tell you all the things, the ins and outs and things I tried. If you want, after this presentation, to explore pastels, I'll certainly answer any emails or questions. You can get that at my website, and I'm going to pass these around because this is kind of an overview of what I'll talk about. So if you please pass these around. There's some reference material and information on there that you can resource. But I've also got on that Carol Strock-Wasson. If you want to learn how to do pastels beyond this little short introduction on how to get started, that's the place to go. Carol does online and in-person classes for like $15 a week, and she will critique. You send in your picture at the end of the week. It's not a paint-along. She has written lessons and talks about some aspect of art, and you don't have to be a pastelist to learn something. But there's a lot of people online with me that are doing oils and watercolor and other mediums. Because what she talks about are things that translate in any medium you do. But Carol would be a good place to start, and like I say, she has a little quick discussion, does an online demo, sends you that video, and then you can study it, rewind it, pause it, look in your paint box and get the colors you want, mix them up, and restart it. And then you send in something, an assignment, and she'll do a quick little critique on it to a private Facebook page. So there's a little plug for her because she's taught me a lot, and we all have to find somebody that we can follow and learn from. That's what we're all here for, and that's what I'm hoping to impart to you tonight, is just a little bit of how to get started. Like I said, I started about 6.5 years ago. It's not quite 6.5, but my sister, she used to always draw and paint with me when I was a kid in my teens and 20s. Going to college and things, we would draw and paint together, but she always did pastels. And I never really got into them because it was like, I'm having a hard enough time learning how to mix up, green with my oil paints. So, the time went by and everything, and I met all these pastel artists doing plein air paintings, and I just got kind of, let's see what pastel's like. So I went out and I spent a whole $7.99 for this box right here of pastels, and I think it's like 48 pastels that you get at Hobby Lobby for $8. All right. Well, this stick right here retails for $8, just one stick. And there's 48 colors in here. So I don't recommend you going and getting 48 $8 pastels a stick just to find out, well, that wasn't very good use of my money. So start small, and the reality is I can still use these as underpaintings. So if you decide to buy better pastels later on, then you can keep these. And I use these things for all sorts of underpainting techniques, and hopefully we've got time that I can show you how I grind them up and put them in mediums and brush them on to create some texture and things. So we'll get to that. So the first thing, I'll introduce you to some of the materials, because that's a big mystery whenever you start things. And what I'm saying is just one person's point of view. Just like oil painting, just like every other art form we've had, you ask 10 different artists and you'll get maybe 8 different ways to start a painting, if not 10 different ways to start a painting, and 10 different ways to finish it, and 10 different ways to, the palette that you use to squirt out on the tubes or pastel palette. And the same thing is true with pastels. So whatever I tell you here is just one experience. And by getting with other pastel artists, especially at plein air events, and sharing that information, you'll pick up more than what I have here. So, but basically, pastels are divided into different types of pastels. You have soft pastels. You have soft pan pastels. What they are, any of you women here wear makeup? All right. You know that makeup comes in cakes, and you use the brush and you stick it on there and you get your cheekbones all highlighted and everything. Well, that's what pan pastels look like. They're just in a little cake, just like a compact. And matter of fact, I could probably almost bet you $100 and I would win that some of the brushes and foam pads that they sell in art magazines for umpteen $million a piece are probably made by the cosmetic companies to put those pan pastels on and to blend them with.
They look like them.
They look exactly like them. So, that's a pan pastel. Then there's pastel pencils. That just looks like your regular drawing pencil with a lead that's with different colors. And then there's oil pastels. Now, I didn't bring any oil pastels tonight because they're not compatible very easily with dry pastels. And oil pastels, just because you learn how to do something with a soft pastel or these pastels I brought tonight, oil pastels act totally different. They're closer to using paintbrush on a stick or an oil stick, if you've ever used an oil stick. But the thing is, I found with oil pastels is, one year here at Kikianga, I brought oil pastels. Now, that's all I did, I think, all that weekend was little oil pastels, like 5x7, maybe 8x10 was the biggest. But just imagine trying to paint a 20x24 and your brush is only like a number 4 because you're using the stick like a brush, and it would take you a long time to do something bigger than 8x10, but it's possible. There's a lot of people that do. And you can mix the oil pastels with turpentines and terpenoid and make washes. But I don't know why you would do that if you can do your underpainting in an oil wash, let it dry, and then stick the oil pastels on top. So we're going to focus just on the chalks, which they call soft pastels. Now, this may get a little confusing, but soft pastels come then in different grades. And your handout shows that. They come in a hard, and then they come in, depending on what artist you talk to, they'll come in a semi-hard or a semi-soft. Just depends on who you're talking to. But basically, they're talking about it's not real hard and it's not real soft. And they advertise it usually as a mid or semi-hard or soft pastel in your art catalogs. And then you have a soft. Well, it's all relative, all right? I mean, you go to pick out a pillow, and you've got soft, you've got extra firm, but they're all soft, right? I mean, it's a pillow. It's not like a brick. So You know, but there's a relativity. When they say soft pastel, it's a relativity. And that's why I wanted to list down underneath this on your paper the different pastels that I have used. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list, but the first one is the new pastel. And the new pastel comes in a box. They're made by Prismacolor. And they come in a box like this, and there's about 120 or 30 of them, and they're less than $1 a piece. But you can kind of get an idea of what they look like. They're little sticks, and these are kind of dirty, but you wipe them off and you start using them. And unlike a dirty paintbrush, the dust on here isn't as invasive to what you're putting on it. You don't have to have them perfectly clean like you do a paintbrush. So that's one advantage I've discovered right away. But these are hard, and you can do some fun things with them. And usually these are used to wash in or to block in areas. You turn them on the side and you can block in areas, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But Caron de Art, it's French, and anybody know how to pronounce that really? All right. That's the way I do it. That's French, but it's made in Switzerland, their products, and they are actually harder than these. And then Rembrandt are what I call, they sell them as soft pastels. When you see Rembrandt in a catalog, don't get confused that Avon said, oh, these are semi-hard or semi-soft. That's how I categorize them, because they aren't really soft, but they're not really hard. You know, it's kind of like that pillow that says firm, you know, but it's not like a brick. It's still soft. You still put your head on it at night. So the Rembrandts are a nice medium pastel. Then the next is Diane Townsend. Diane Townsend makes sticks, but there's these things that she was, I guess, in cahoots with Wolf Kahn. And Wolf Kahn wanted a set of pastels that met his specification. And I guess if you sell paintings like Wolf Kahn did, then you'll get somebody to make pastels the way you want them, rather than, well, I'm sorry, this is all we've got, But these are called tirages, Terrages, and they come in these little blocks. Now the reason Wolf Kahn liked them, I'm told, is because they have a kind of a pumice built into them. There's kind of a grittiness to them. And he liked to work on regular papers rather than special papers, and the grit would scratch the paper and make more pastel stick to it before it got overloaded. So he could put multiple layers on, and they become very popular. Matter of fact, the set, there's 3 boxes, 3 different kinds. This set's called the Wolf Kahn selection because of the bright colors and things. So if you're not familiar with Wolf Kahn, just look him up and you'll see why this is called the Wolf Kahn set pretty quick. My favorite of all pastels are these unisons. Unisons come in sets of harmonized colors. The colors are already like this is called a set that is blue-violet. So there's a blue set, there's a red set, a red-violet set, and so you buy these in these little sets, and they're sets of harmonized colors. So you don't have to do as much mixing. Great American. Great American is a really, really soft pastel. It's softer than the Unison. It's really buttery. You put it on, and it'll almost feel like you're painting with a stick of butter, or like an oil pastel without the oil. So if you like the buttery feel, and the pigments are ground a lot finer than with Diane Townsend and the Unison. Sinlier makes a famous French company. They've made art supplies for since the 1800s, and they're super soft. They're softer than even the Great American, and for me they're almost too soft because of the textures that I use, which I'll pass around some of those so you can feel the different textures. All these pastels that I'm naming, and Sminky is the softest of all. Matter of fact, if you press too hard on a Sminky, like you try to make an aggressive mark, the thing will just crumble in your hands because it is so soft. So the reason I bring all these up is that's the first decision. It's like, well, what all right, Avon said get this set, and I've decided I like pastels. Now let's get some serious colors. But man, there's all these different kinds of pastels. What I recommend you do is just buy a small set of something that is soft, whether it's Unison, whether it is Great American, Sminky, or whatever. Just a basic set of 12 to 40 colors, and see if you like them. And then as you build your colors, just buy one stick out of the catalog of maybe 2 or 3 different kinds of manufacturers. That's how I found out I didn't like that Swiss hard stick. It turned out to be so hard that, unless I use it on sandpaper, I can't get the color to come off the stick. And at least these, you can get the color to come off on a regular paper. So as you start with this basic set and then add your Hobby Lobby set in, and you buy 1 or 2 colors of different manufacturers, you'll start to get a feel for, oh, now I see why Avon said this was semi-hard. I see that this one's harder than this one, but they're both called soft pastels in the catalog. So the idea is that you can start to learn based on the way you decide to paint. I'm going to pass this around. We're going to talk about papers real quick, and then I'm going to do a little demo of some of the things that I've done. But I took this sketch pad, and don't feel afraid to touch these. I actually want you to touch them when I pass this around. I want you to touch this to see the texture. Each page is labeled, what this pastel feels like just on a drawing paper, all the way back to some really, really gritty stuff. Like this one here has, it's called a heavy gel that has been added to it. I painted on it, and actually you can go like this, and maybe the last person gets it, there won't be much texture left there because the people will be touching it. But you can actually see the little stones coming off because there's so much texture in this gel. So the paper is another variable. Just pass this around. Oh! Here's one that is on sanded paper, and I'll pass this around also. But you can see how I have washed this off. That's the neat thing about pastel. Up to a certain point, an oil painting or an acrylic painting, you can scrape the paint off and paint over it unless you got it real thick in an area or something. And I just take a hose or stick it under the faucet, and I can reuse this paper up to a certain point. So that's kind of neat too. The paper is kind of a mystery. I started out with what they call pastel paper. Pastel paper is very much like charcoal paper. It's got a texture, and the texture's different on each side. And but the pastel paper, that's what my sister used, 30, 40 years ago, and that's all they made back then was just pastel paper with a texture on it. But now they've come out with papers that are like sandpaper. The pieces coming around here, if you turn that over, the big square, and it'll say 400 on the back. It's basically sandpaper, and it's 400 grit. Now they make a 320, they make a 600, and they make an 800. The 800 is real fine. Like if you would use an 800 if you liked realism, and you wanted not a lot of texture to interfere with that line and those values you're putting on. So again, through experimentation, I found that I like the sanded paper and I like my homemade surfaces. The homemade surfaces are also in that sample coming along, but this is golden clear granular gel. And I'll pass that around, but you can stick your finger in there if you want. But this is a gel that has, on that last page, I was telling you how the stuff falls off. This has got the big granulars in it. There's a very fine, and I use the fine gel quite often, and it's got pumice in it, so it's like what's on that sandpaper coming around. And then I use Gessos. I use Gessos that Liquitex makes a clear gesso. Now, I haven't found another maker that makes some. I'm sure some make a clear gesso, but Liquitex gesso has pumice in it. So I can take a smooth surface, whether it's a board panel, whether it's a piece of glass or a mylar, and I can paint that with the pumice and let it dry, and I can end up with a surface that is the way I have started experimenting and like. I like a rough surface, and that's why if I use a Sminky or a Great American, my surface is so rough that, you know, I can take a 16 by 20 and I could cover that with $9 in one stick real quick and find half of that stick on the floor underneath me. So it's not a real effective use of my pastels. So I found other ways to do my underpaintings, and I want to share some of that with you with these. The painting that I'm doing is from the Mississinawa River. And I start with a photograph, and if I'm not painting outside, and I've kind of become I don't know, I don't like the cold weather as much as I did maybe 20 years ago. So I don't paint much outside. I paint more in the studio. And so I take a picture, but rather than be married to this picture, I break the picture down into different drawings. And then I paint primarily from one of these drawings. And I use the photograph. I'll put it back up here. I only use it to hide the other two drawings so I don't get confused. And then if I want to put a detail in or check the way the light is reflecting off the water in this particular case, I'll use the photograph that way. But basically, I've already simplified all the many details in this because I don't paint realistically. I paint more impressionistically and more, I'm looking for tones and mood. So my purpose and the way I'm directing myself, after experimenting for 6 years with this medium, is to try to create atmosphere and mood. So that's a little bit about how we're doing here, and I have already painted this twice, okay? Not because I was chicken, and I wanted to make sure, of course that was part of it too, I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was doing because I might be really nervous in front of all you guys. But really what I like to do is I like to play with different color schemes. So I've painted this thing twice, and my process is this. I go from this to the drawings, and then I'll do a 6x6 or an 8x8 like you see here, and then, or like you see here, these keep peeling off of here. And so what I do here is then I keep working small until I decide, okay, I have, by drawing this, 3 times in pencil, twice in pastel, I have a really, really good idea of how to put this picture together, whether I was doing watercolor, acrylic, oil, or pastel. All I really now am trying to do is figure out, what color scheme I like it best in. But I would probably paint this one more time in an 8x8 before I went to this 12x12 that I've got up here tonight. So that's my process. And in order to block this in and show you how I've learned to use some of these materials, I'll share that with you here. And we'll hide those so I'm not tempted to follow the wrong one, so to speak. All right. There's different ways to block in one of these images. Okay. Now, I've chosen this color scheme here, and when we take a break after this, before they start the business meeting, you can come up and look at some of these, I call them my color collection. What I do is I will pick I'll see something in a magazine, like a plein air magazine or an art magazine, and I'll say, oh man, I love those colors, and what great harmony. All right, I could probably come up with that by trying to remember it, but I collect these colors. I'll take the painting that's in the magazine, and then you can see on the back of this, I've found these colors in a magazine, and I have tried to dissect them or reverse engineer that painting and find out what palettes and what colors that artist used. And then I just kind of sketched out the blocked in big areas with them and played with them on the other side. So most of these are two-sided, and you'll see how I collect the different colors that I'm impressed with. And what that does is it lets me then not have to sort through all these colors that I've collected, and I can have a starting point with these colors that I said, okay, let me see if I can make orange and red snow, okay? And that would be fun. It's like sunset, and you get that orange coming across. I think Barb was telling me it was that way last night at the sunset where she was. So you are able to pull out of all these colors some of the colors that you're wanting by using the color collection. So it's just like a shortcut I found, and somebody told me that at one of the workshops I was in. Okay, so let's say we've got, just like in these others, it looks like it's a sunset. I'm using this set here, so probably my sky is going to have some orange and yellow in it. Now, I can take the side of the pastel and just quickly block that in, and then there's going to be a sunset in there. And we got a little reflection coming down through here. All right, this is working just on a sanded piece of paper. It has no texture added to it or anything like that. I could just block it in using the side of the pastel. And that's the way most beginners start, is doing that. Well, then somebody came along at a workshop, or maybe just in a conversation, and said, you can paint watercolor on there and wash it in with big brushes and wash in the underpainting in watercolor. Oh, that's good. So I did that for a while. Then I found these things. These crayons. Now, they look just like Crayola crayons, all right, but they're water soluble. They're made by that company that's on that list, Caran de Art, and they're called Pastel Neo2s. And you can see, or not, you can see where, you know, when you press real hard on a crayon, it cakes on and you get a nice bright line and everything. Well, you know, you don't have to do that with these. You just kind of put in some background color using the side of them. And I'm going to stick gloves on here. These are very non-toxic. I mean, if you eat them, you'll get some toxins, but you know, they're not going to soak into your skin. So I'm not putting these on because of that. I get very dry skin, and I found that wearing these gloves and painting all day long and having the gloves on most of the time, I get fewer cracks in my my skin. So I don't know. There's just something about that chalky feel that makes me, I don't know. So, all right. So now, like I said, these are water soluble. And I've got just a very light, anybody on there can't see anything but just a little bit of shadow or anything? Is this, okay? That's the way it is. I mean, it's just barely there. And I'm going to start with the highlights. And you put a little water on where things are. And pretty soon you'll start to see how the colors just kind of start to explode out on that. But as I said, I've painted this thing, drawn it 3 times. So I've got a pretty good idea how it's all constructed. And even if it bleeds down, that's kind of fun. Oh, the Bob Ross said we have happy little accidents. There's no accidents. They're just all happy little accidents and things like that. So
you don't have a squirrel, Avon.
I don't have a squirrel in there. Well, that's a fine detail. We can put that one at the end.
I meant Bob Ross, you know, he had one on his shoulder or something.
Oh, my. I hadn't seen that episode. So you can see how, you know, if I was doing watercolor, you could easily block in big areas with a big brush. And I've got smaller brushes and things, and I could do some smaller details. Now, the other thing I found, which is kind of cool, is you know, people use alcohol sometimes and vodka. Well, they use vodka for many things, including drinking it when they're not using it here. But isopropyl alcohol. Matter of fact, Carol told a story once where she had been using isopropyl and had it in a container, and now she doesn't drink at all, but she buys vodka to do her underpaintings because it will evaporate and dry quicker. Well, I used water here, okay? This little heat gun, my wife gave me a hair dryer that was rattling, and I used it for a few weeks, and then finally the fan went out and it just started smoking. So I went out and got this. And this works really good because it's got a thermostat. These things are used to remove paint. And so if I turn this thing all the way up, I might remove the paint and the surface rather than, you know, dry it. So I've turned the thermostat almost all the way down, which is 120. I'm probably between about 140 and 150 degrees when I kick this thing on. The other thing is it doesn't make noise like that squirrel fan that my old hairdryer used to make. So, and you can tell I don't need a hairdryer. So, you know. But the neat thing here is with alcohol, this would dry faster. And but as I was telling the story with Carol, she starts using the vodka because somebody was in a workshop and mistakenly picked it up like a glass of water. And so she quickly learned that, okay, it's rather than go blind, they can have a quick shot of vodka in the future. So, but if this was watercolor, Then, you could do the same sort of thing. And I will use this hair dryer to dry surfaces so I can paint on them again. This will get us underway, but I'll switch to something else here so you can see another process while that dries. Now, lately I've been doing some mixed media, and I calling it that kindly. It's really pastel. I mean, to me, what's the difference if my underpainting is this or watercolor? If you use this or watercolor underneath or any other medium other than pastel, they usually will still call the finished painting a pastel. All right? You don't have to call it a mixed medium. Northern Indiana Pastel Society says that if your painting is 90% pastel, then it qualifies to be called a pastel. But I'm going to demo a mixed media method. There's a question.
Eva, what was the name of the crayons you used for that underpainting again?
On that sheet I passed out as Caran de Art, CRAND-art.
Right, I've got that. But
Oh, Neo, yeah, water soluble. It's called Neo2 pastel.
a what?
A Neo, N-E-O, Neo2 pastel. And there is a Neo 1, which is not water soluble. So you want to make sure you get the Neo 2.
The French of that would be carandache.
Carandache? Oh, yes, all right. Boy, was I way off, all right. I have trouble speaking one language, let alone more than that. So I appreciate the help on that. All right, so as I said, I will use anything and everything. I saw this new description of this one artist call himself a materials researcher. I kind of like that, materials researcher, because I'm always experimenting with different textures, different materials. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you an underpainting in acrylic, which technically makes my painting a mixed media painting. So that is something that, I'll leave that up to the judges and anybody else that wants to argue that even the others are. But like I said, for some reason, if you do an underpainting in watercolor or this stuff, it's not mixed media. But as soon as I add acrylic, it is. Do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do. And now, I used to do these wine and canvas. They used to be really popular, and then, everybody and their brother got to do them and has plenty of paintings hanging up, so they're not as popular now. But so I used to go around and do those, and I've got a whole box of these, well, you can see it there, of these primary colors with just a few secondary colors. So I got to thinking, well, I need to use these supplies up. So I started playing around with this mixed medium. Now, one thing I'm going to do here, let's see, we're going to get some violets in there.
You are definitely not afraid of color.
No. Okay, I wanted to get enough color on there for you to see something here before I start applying acrylic goo, okay? Another neat thing is this is a soft brayer as opposed to a hard brayer. It's a soft rubber brayer used for printmaking. And this is kind of neat little trick that I just learned here in the last year was that, let's say this was something recognizable. anyway, I've got different colors on here, and this brayer, you can just go over that, and it picks up some of that color. So if I wanted to put like a branch or something up in here, you can see I can put branches of trees. And pretty soon you go from a mishmash of stuff to something that you can so you can just use this brayer and mix in colors. Now you want to go over this, but this is a way to quickly kind of start blending some of those colors together and everything. So I wanted to get that in there and show you that, but let's start with the acrylic underpainting. Now sometimes, I'm using water tonight, but sometimes I will, I'll mix in clear gesso instead of water, and the clear gesso is adding pumice to it, so when it dries, I can apply pastel easily to it. And at break, if you want to come up and look at these brushes after they've been used on sandpaper, it'll be quite a little treat for you to see what they look like. I was showing somebody that before we started, and it was like having a bad hair day, all frizzy.
How long do they last, Avon?
I don't know. I've been using these same brushes here for, I don't know, for probably 15 or 20 paintings.
Okay.
Well, that's normally about ½ inch longer and usually squared off. So, yeah. So, and this one's been used for 6 months. I'll take it under the faucet and that piece of paper, the sanded paper that I showed you where I wiped off, that's what was done here. So.
Do they start out as oil brushes or acrylic?
Those are brushes are from Menards and Lowe's. They're like 69. I used to get them for like 50 cents each, and they're like 69 to 99 cents depending on the size. But by just mixing in these colors, you know, I can start to. Now my underpainting, I'm not worried about values. By that I mean, you know, when you've got a good balanced painting, you want to gray down certain colors and have other colors come forward by, you know, different methods and things. So I'm just using the basic shapes here, which are triangles, to give me a sense of where I'm going to go with this. And you've got a little bit of darks down in here where the bank meets the river. We got a dark patch here where the trees are going to come up. But when you come up here and you take a look at this, you'll be able to see that, that there's brush textures in here, the thicker I put the paint. Now imagine if I put some gel with some pumice in it, I get some really, really deep textures. And the easiest way to fill those textures in is to either rub it into the color, or you can rub the color into the texture that's left by this acrylic. But you're somewhat limited with just plain sandpaper and pastel paper. So getting these areas to have some texture allow me, when this is dry, to drag the pressure that you use these different hardnesses, like the soft pastel and the medium pastels and the super soft and the hard pastels. When there's a texture and you've got the paint and the color basics underneath this, and you start to drag those soft pastels over those little ridges, you'll get some neat layering effects that you just can't get in any other medium. And what's neat is that you saw before I added this acrylic to here, how quick I was able to take the side of the pastel and brush it in. Well, I was tempted to do an oil demonstration here in the sense of having somebody time me as I mixed up a green. And time me by the time I, picked out the colors I was going to mix the green, mix it up, and see how long that took to get that green. And then the second time with pastel is like, okay, I got my green, So when you hear people talk about the immediacy, and immediacy is like one of those funny words that you hear and you kind of grow up with, and you learn, what enigma means, or some other word like an enigma. You learn that it's kind of like a puzzling or a surprise, puzzling sort of situation. And then somebody asks you, well, what's an enigma? And you have to give a definition, and you stumble around like I just did. It's like, kind of know what it means, but you have to look it up for the person to really understand what the definition is. So what I'm getting at is that the immediacy is, I heard people say, oh, I like pastel because it's got an immediacy to it, And it becomes one of those words that, the root word is immediate, but until you actually pick up these materials and start playing with the different colors and spreading them on fast and realize, oh, I don't like that color, and go over here, and you just take your finger and you can wipe it out, where normally on an oil brush you got to wipe it off with turpentine and maybe let it dry to put a new color on, and then it gets muddy. So there's an immediacy that they talk about, and that's what really has made me want to stay with pastels. Not only that, but I'm having so much fun, mixing stuff up. So. But what I'll normally do is I'll just kind of get rough, big blocked areas in like this, and then I go over it with, when you come up here, you can see this one has a texture on it, and this one over here doesn't. This is just sanded paper. This has an underpainting under it. And when I do a big piece like this, I'll probably take this back in the studio tomorrow or this week, and I will then add some gels to it. And once you know where your highlights are, if you've ever looked at an oil painting, the thick part of the oil, even if somebody's doing realism, the thick part of the oil is where the highlights are. And that's usually the thickest paint, unless they just messed up. But, and your darks are more washes, and they're a thinner paint. They might be transparent or semi-transparent. You can still see through those shadows and those dark areas. But by doing the method I've done, I like to have that effect of that thick paint, that impasto in my highlights. So, I know that this sunset is going to be back in here. So I'm going to put the thickest paint right up in there. And then I got a little speck of water. You'll see it here. I got some specks of water that are going to catch a little light. And then down through this river, there's some areas of highlight that they don't look like much here. But once I start blending with the pastel, then I can start seeing those things and making those things come out. So, and I've got some violet. Well, this pastel that I put on there and I washed in, I tried to demonstrate how you use the side of the pastel and quickly block things in. That is actually mixing with this paint and letting me kind of play with some different values back in there. tops of the trees, going to be a little bit lighter. As I kind of muddle this in here, anybody have any questions? Because I don't want to run you guys much over an hour here. Oh, man.
You have to go up to the mic so people on Zoom can hear you.
Oh, I have.
You can repeat it. You can repeat the question after it's asked.
Okay, got it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Either way.
What's the question?
I don't know if you told us what kind of paper you use under all that.
Okay, the question was what kind of paper I use on this particular one. This is sanded. It's UArt. It's on your paper. It's UArt, and it's 400 grit. There's another question over here.
Maybe you're going to get to this, but if not, I'm just curious, your setup for when you do plein air with pastels. Like what type of easel you like, how you plan your pastels.
Okay, you actually can see that up here. This is my plein air painting rig. Now the studio, I almost took a picture of and put it on my website of my toolbox. Any of you guys or girls have tools in your, these big toolboxes that stand up and there's one sets on top of another? I don't use the top part, but I use the bottom part to put all my pastels on top and then pull out the drawers, and I've got this big palette of pastels in my studio. Well, there's no way to take that in plein air. So you take a selection, and this is it. You take a selection of a variety of colors, and you have to do some mixing. Just like paints, you can mix a blue and a yellow together, and you'll get a blue-green or a green-blue or a yellow-blue. By mixing different things. You drag some white over the top, and you can bring the value down, or you could add darker colors or even some grays. We try to stay away from blacks because just like in oil paint, they're very, very powerful. So we try to use they make these sets of darks. And down in this corner, you'll see these dark Rembrandts that I can make something look like it's a shadow and dark and mixing it with some reds and things, depending on whether I want it warm or cool. But this is my plein air setup here.
But you don't pick a different palette for each time you go out, you just have a certain array you go.
What I do is I take this whole array here that you see in the box, and then I'll have a box like this that once I pick out my color scheme, I call it a color scheme, but most workshops you'll hear them talk about color harmonies, which is your split triad, your all those things you learn on the color wheel, or what's the opposites? Complementary, yeah, or split complementaries. Thank you. So I pulled these out of this box so I wouldn't have to go sort through those. Not just for the demo, but that's the way I work. It's a starting point. Now, I may go back to the box as I get this thing near finish, which we're not going to finish tonight, but if I were finishing, then I may go back to the box and get some subtle colors. But if it's not there and it's back to the studio, I have to mix it. Other questions? All right.
I was going to ask, so you actually drew this, sketched it, then you put down a pastel that you watered, and now you're doing acrylic. Is that your normal process? And then you'll go back over top of it with pastel?
No, normally I do one or the other. I'll wash it in. I just did the wash in with the side of the stick of the pastel to show you how most people learn to start by using a hard pastel or a cheap pastel like the Hobby Lobby, and to wash in just some basic colors, and then you start refining it. I just did that for demonstration purposes. Normally, I will just start in with the, now I'm kind of playing with the acrylics and using the clear gesso instead of water to make some texture underneath. And you'll get some really neat effects because there's so many layers. I mean, if you look at a close-up, or come up close to some of these that are that have layers, you can see that there's a yellow underneath a blue, and they kind of combine almost like pointillism, except that it's not a bunch of dots, it's a bunch of skips where the texture is underneath. But my underpainting is basically just trying to get some lights and darks, and then I can play with the values. I'm just trying to get some basic shapes is all I work on. Now, to be honest with you, when I first started, remember I wanted to have orange snow, so there I got my orange snow finally. I should probably work on this and post it on my website or on FWAG's website so you can see how it goes from this to basic shapes of lights and darks to a finish. You want me to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Do you,
Oh. Oh, affirmative. Oh.
do you mind continuing working on it while we have our business meeting?
No, that's fine.
That'd be great, so we
Okay.
can see it progress.
All right, I'll do that. And before we close the business, because I just wanted to just show you materials, show you how I experiment and pass these around. Question?
Avon, when you're finished, do you spray your pastels?
Oh, good point. I meant to talk about that. Thanks. That's called a fixative.
Right.
Most pastel artists won't use a fixative anymore because what happens is the colors change and they don't change the same. It's not like, well, okay, everything just kind of changes all together, but they're still in harmony, right? Well, no. What happens is the darks tend to get darker than the lights. The lights might stay the same. So what they do is they will, if they run out of tooth, they'll use a workable fixative to be able to add pastels to it. But when they frame, they'll put spacers, little plastic spacers, and if this, we're giving away a painting, if you look at that painting sideways like this, you'll see the plastic spacer between the glass and the frame, and the painting sits on top of those spacers and keeps it off the glass. So good question. Others? All right, all minds clear. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Avon.
Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne. Learn more under the Explore tab at acpl.info.